I never thought I'd hear my own son's name whispered like that. Low, uneasy, almost like it carried a warning. It wasn't gossip about a stranger. It was about him, my boy. My flesh and blood. I froze in the middle of the grocery aisle when Mrs. Khan, my neighbor of 20 years, leaned closer. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I don't want to alarm you, but I've been hearing things about your son. Strange things." The apples I was holding slipped from my hands and rolled across the floor. I laughed nervously, brushing her words away. Rumors, I told myself. My son was good, respectful, focused. He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't dangerous. Still, her words clung to me like smoke. That evening at dinner, I studied him. The clink of his spoon against the bowl felt louder than usual. He avoided my eyes. When I asked about school, he shrugged. His answers were short. His shoulders tense. He seemed elsewhere. I told myself it was just teenage moodiness. But then his phone buzzed under the table. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. Before I could say a word, he excused himself and slipped upstairs. The silence that followed felt like a void. Later, when I knocked on his door, he cracked it open just enough to say, "I'm busy, Mom." No smile. No warmth, just a wall where there used to be open trust. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. Mrs. Khan's voice replayed in my head. Strange things. What did she mean? Drugs, bad company, secrets? The next day, I lingered by the window. At first, everything seemed normal. Kids walking to school, neighbors tending their lawns. But then I saw him, my son, slipping out through the side gate when he should have been inside studying. His steps were quick, almost guilty. My chest tightened. My heart drummed so loud it drowned out every thought. I wanted to call his name to stop him, but something held me back. A voice inside whispered, "Don't confront, watch." That night I tried to act normal. I made his favorite curry, hoping he'd open up. But he barely touched his plate. His phone buzzed again. He grabbed it and muttered, "I'm going to bed." Except he didn't. I heard the faint creak of the back door just after midnight. My body went cold. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and tiptoed to the window. There he was, a shadow moving quickly across the yard. My own son, carrying something in his hand, small, rectangular, almost like an envelope. My breath hitched. He didn't see me. He kept walking until he disappeared into the streetlight's glow. I pressed my hand against the glass, torn between running after him and staying frozen in place. Questions hammered inside my head. Where was he going? Who was he meeting? And why did it feel like I was already losing him? Minutes dragged into hours before he returned. His shoes were muddy, his hair damp with sweat. He didn't notice me watching from the dark hallway as he crept back into his room. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stood there trembling, one thought circling over and over. If I pushed too hard, I might lose him forever. The next morning, I tried to search his room while he was in the shower. My hands shook as I lifted his backpack, heavier than usual. I unzipped it slowly, terrified of what I might find. My fingers brushed against paper, documents folded tightly. My heart lurched. I pulled one halfway out. Numbers, names, amounts of money scribbled in ink, and a signature I didn't recognize. Before I could read more, I heard the bathroom door click open. My son's footsteps approached. I shoved the papers back, zipped the bag, and barely slipped out before he entered. My pulse thundered. My legs felt like they could collapse any second. I leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe. What had I just seen? Why was my son carrying documents that looked nothing like schoolwork? And why did every instinct in my body scream that this was only the beginning? I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but I knew the truth. I couldn't ignore this any longer. The next time he slipped out at night, I wouldn't just stand at the window. I would follow him. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I had promised myself, next time he slipped out, I wouldn't just stand at the window. I would follow him. That chance came 2 nights later. It was past midnight when I heard the soft creak of the back door. My body jolted awake, heart pounding like a drum. I slipped on a shawl, grabbed my keys, and crept after him. My bare feet made no sound against the cold tiles. Outside, the air was sharp, filled with the smell of damp soil. I spotted his shadow moving quickly down the street. He was clutching that same envelope again. I held my breath and followed at a distance. Every step felt heavy with dread. He turned the corner, heading toward the old bus stop. My stomach twisted. What could he possibly need to do there at this hour? The street was deserted, the faint buzz of the street lamp the only sound. Then I saw him stop. A man emerged from the shadows. Older, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that brushed the ground. My son stiffened, but the man gave him a small nod, like they knew each other. I pressed myself against the wall of a closed shop, straining to hear. The man handed him something. A thicker envelope this time. My son tucked it quickly into his jacket, glancing around like a thief. My throat went dry. I wanted to rush forward, to demand answers, but fear rooted me in place. The man leaned closer, speaking in a low voice. I caught fragments. Soon, don't tell her. Everything will change. Her, that was me. I froze. My son nodded. He looked nervous, but he didn't resist. The man placed a firm hand on his shoulder before melting back into the darkness. My son stood there a moment, staring at the ground before walking away. I followed him all the way home, my hands trembling. By the time he climbed back through the side gate, I was already inside, pretending to be asleep. My heart, however, was wide awake. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I asked if he wanted breakfast. He shook his head. He shoved the same backpack onto his shoulder and mumbled, "I'll be late." "Don't wait up." He didn't meet my eyes. After he left, I sank into the kitchen chair. My mind whirled. Who was that man? Why was my son taking envelopes of money? And what did he mean by "don't tell her"? By afternoon, my nerves were frayed. I walked next door to Mrs. Khan's house. She answered the door with surprise. "You've seen him too, haven't you?" I whispered. Her eyes widened. She hesitated before nodding. I didn't want to interfere, but I've seen him meeting that man twice now. Always late at night. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. She glanced around nervously. "I think he's your late husband's brother." My breath caught in my throat. My brother-in-law. A flood of memories rushed back, the bitterness in his eyes during the reading of my husband's will, the way he had stormed out when he realized the estate had been left to me and my son. He had always believed he deserved a share, and now he had found another way. Through my child. That evening I set the table for dinner, trying to keep my hands steady. When my son walked in, his clothes were slightly rumpled, his eyes darting around as if measuring my mood. I asked gently, "Where have you been?" "Out," he muttered, stabbing at the food without really eating. "With whom?" "Friends," he snapped. "Why do you always need to know everything?" The anger in his voice pierced me like a blade. He had never spoken to me like that before. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but something told me pushing harder would only drive him closer to his uncle. So I stayed quiet, swallowing my pain, but later, when he left his jacket hanging carelessly on the chair, I slipped my hand into the pocket. My fingers brushed against the envelope, thick, heavy. I pulled it out just enough to see stacks of notes. Cash. My chest tightened. I slid it back before he noticed, but my decision was made. This wasn't just rebellion. This wasn't teenage secrecy. This was manipulation. And my son was being used like a pawn. 2 days later, I couldn't hold back anymore. I waited until he returned late at night, his footsteps dragging. I stood in the hallway. "We need to talk." He froze. His hand tightened on the strap of his bag. "About what?" "About where you've been going." "About who you've been meeting." His face drained of color. "You're spying on me?" "No, I'm worried about you." "You're hiding things, money, papers." "That man—" "Stop." His voice cracked like thunder. "You don't understand. Uncle said you'd twist everything. He said you'd never let me make my own choices." The words hit me like stones. Uncle, so it was true. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "He doesn't care about you. He only cares about the inheritance. About your father's estate." My son's eyes flickered with doubt, but then hardened. You're just jealous because he trusts me more than you. He pushed past me and slammed his door shut. I stood there in the dark hallway, trembling, my heart breaking piece by piece. But then I remembered the documents I'd seen in his bag. The money. The whispers of my brother-in-law's anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was war. And somehow my son was in the middle of it. I sank against the wall, gripping the edge of the banister, as one terrifying thought burned into my mind. If my son had already chosen his uncle's side, how far would he go to betray me? I couldn't sleep that night. His words kept slicing through me. Uncle said you'd twist everything. He trusts me more than you. My own son. Believing the lies of a man who had spent years resenting me. By dawn, my eyes were swollen, my body heavy with exhaustion, but my mind sharp. If my brother-in-law had already poisoned my son's thoughts, then proof was the only way to fight back. I needed to know what they were planning, before it was too late. The next morning, while my son was in the shower, I slipped into his room again. My hands trembled as I lifted his backpack from the corner. The same heaviness was there. The same secret weight. I unzipped it slowly. Inside were papers, folded, some creased, some freshly printed. I sat on the edge of his bed, my heart racing as I spread them out. The first sheet made my stomach turn. It was a bank receipt, a deposit slip with my son's name scrawled in messy handwriting. The amount wasn't small, several thousand rupees. Far more than a teenager could ever need. Beneath it, another paper. This time typed. A copy of my late husband's will. At least a version of it. My eyes scanned the lines. Words had been underlined, some crossed out. And in the margin, notes written in my brother-in-law's sharp handwriting. Challenge clause. File petition? Use boy as witness. My hands went cold. This wasn't just manipulation. It was strategy. They were planning to drag my son into a legal war. I flipped to another page. It was a statement, drafted but unsigned. My throat tightened as I read the words. I have seen my mother mishandle my father's assets. I believe she is unfit to manage the estate. My vision blurred with tears. My son, my boy, was being prepared to testify against me. A creak outside the door jolted me. I stuffed the papers back into the bag, zipped it shut, and jumped to my feet just as the bathroom door opened. He walked out, toweling his hair, his eyes narrowing when he saw me standing there. What are you doing in my room? He asked. My voice faltered. Just picking up laundry. He didn't answer. He just stared. Suspicious. Guarded. For the first time in his life, I saw him looking at me not with trust, but with doubt. Later that day, I called my oldest friend, Farah. She had been my rock through every storm, the kind of woman who always spoke with blunt honesty. When I told her what I'd found, she fell silent for a long time. Then she said, "He's grooming your son. You know that, don't you? He's turning him into a weapon against you." I clutched the phone tighter. But why? Why drag my son into this? If my brother-in-law wants the estate, let him fight me directly. Because, Farah whispered, he knows a mother's voice will always sound like defense. But a son's voice? That carries weight. Especially in court. The words sank deep. She was right. My brother-in-law wasn't just after money. He wanted humiliation. He wanted me destroyed from the inside out. That evening, I tried to reach my son again. I knocked on his door. "Can we talk?" Silence. I tried again. "Please. I just want to understand." Finally, the door cracked open. His eyes were hard. "Understand what? That you've been lying to me my whole life?" I shook my head, my throat aching. "Who told you that?" He crossed his arms. "Uncle showed me the papers. He said you were keeping everything for yourself. That Dad wanted us to share. But you changed things." I staggered back. "That's not true." "He says he has proof." "And what proof do you think I have?" I whispered. "Everything your father left is in your name and mine. That's all. I've never hidden a single thing from you." But he didn't soften. The wall between us had grown too thick. The days that followed were a blur of silence and tension. He left early, came home late. His phone buzzed constantly, and every time I caught his eye, I saw distance where there used to be closeness. I tried calling my brother-in-law once, demanding he leave my son out of this. He laughed, a cold, cutting laugh. You can't protect him from the truth forever. Sooner or later, he'll realize who really cares for him. And when that day comes, you'll be alone. His words echoed long after the call ended. Later that week, Farah came over. She placed a folder on my dining table. I asked a friend in the legal office to check something for me, she said. Inside were copies of recent filings. My brother-in-law had already lodged a petition to challenge the will. Attached was a witness list. My stomach dropped when I saw my son's name. He's serious, Farah said softly. He's building a case, and he's using your son as the cornerstone. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. My son walked in just then, freezing when he saw the folder. His eyes darted to me, then to Farah, suspicion flashing. What is this? He demanded. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Farah tried to step in, but he snatched the folder, rifling through it. His jaw tightened. You're spying on me now? Digging into my life behind my back? Your life? I snapped, my voice breaking. This isn't just your life, it's mine too. It's our family's legacy. And he's dragging you into a war you don't even understand. For a moment, I thought he might listen. His eyes flickered with uncertainty. But then he muttered almost to himself, maybe Uncle's right. Maybe you really are hiding things. And with that, he stormed upstairs, slamming his door so hard the walls shook. Farah touched my arm gently, her voice low. He's slipping further away. If you don't act soon, you'll lose him completely. I sank into the chair, staring at the staircase, my chest tight with dread. The papers, the money, the manipulation, it was all converging toward one outcome. And the terrifying thought lodged itself deep in my mind. If my son truly stood against me in court, would anyone believe I wasn't the guilty one? The question haunted me all night. If my son truly stood against me in court, would anyone believe I wasn't the guilty one? I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my mind racing. By morning, the house felt colder, heavier. The silence between us had grown into something suffocating. At breakfast, I tried again. Please, just talk to me. Tell me what he's saying to you. My son didn't even look up from his plate. You wouldn't believe me anyway. I reached across the table. Try me. He pulled his hand away, his face hard. Uncle said you always twist things to make yourself look innocent. He said Dad trusted him more than you, and that's why the will isn't fair. My chest tightened. The lies had sunk deep. Your father trusted me, I said firmly. He trusted me to raise you, to protect you. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. But my words slid off him like water. He shoved his chair back, muttering, I'm late, and walked out the door. The sound of it slamming behind him echoed like a verdict. Later that week, the first formal notice arrived. A thick envelope bearing the lawyer's seal. My brother-in-law had officially filed to contest the will. I sat at the dining table, tearing the papers open with trembling hands. Legal jargon blurred before my eyes. Petition, mismanagement, financial negligence. My stomach dropped when I saw my own name listed as the respondent. But what cut deepest was the attached statement of intent. It referenced testimony from my son. I pressed the paper to my chest, as if holding it could stop the bleeding inside me. Farah came by that evening. She found me surrounded by scattered documents, my hair unkempt, my eyes swollen. You can't face this alone, she said gently, gathering the papers into a neat pile. You need a lawyer, someone who understands inheritance disputes. The very word made me shiver. A legal fight meant airing everything in public. It meant humiliation. And worst of all, it meant sitting across from my own son in a courtroom. The next morning, I took Farah's advice. I met with a lawyer she recommended, a stern but kind-eyed man named Kamal. He scanned the petition quickly, his brow furrowing. This is a calculated attack. Your brother-in-law knows exactly what he's doing. He's exploiting your son's voice because he knows judges listen to heirs. I swallowed hard. So, what do I do? Kamal leaned forward. We need evidence. Proof that your brother-in-law is manipulating him for money. Receipts, bank transfers. Anything that connects your son's sudden wealth back to him. Without it, This becomes your word against theirs. Evidence. I thought of the envelopes of cash, the deposit slip, my son's backpack. But those weren't in my hands. They were in his. And how could I take them without shattering what little trust was left? That night I tried again to bridge the gap. I knocked softly on his door. He didn't answer at first. But after a long pause, he opened it just enough for me to see his tired eyes. "Can we talk?" I whispered. He sighed. "About what? Another lecture?" "No, about us. About your father." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Uncle told me Dad wanted the property divided, but you fought to keep it all. Is that true?" The question cut deeper than any blade. "Your father wanted security, for you and for me. He knew his brother's greed. That's why he left it this way." My voice broke. "If I could show you the truth, would you believe me?" For a moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. But then he shook his head. "Uncle already showed me his proof." Proof. My brother-in-law was feeding him forged lies, twisting memories into weapons. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then slipped past me with quick steps. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Out," he muttered, already heading down the stairs. The door slammed again, leaving me in silence. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my shawl and followed. From a distance, I saw him walk toward a cafe near the market. Through the window, I spotted him sitting with my brother-in-law. The man's posture was relaxed, smug, while my son leaned in, listening closely. My hands clenched into fists. Rage boiled inside me. But I stayed hidden, watching as my brother-in-law slid a document across the table. My son picked up the pen. My breath caught. Was he signing something? I couldn't storm in, not without exposing myself. So I waited. Minutes later, they stood, shook hands, and left in opposite directions. I slipped into the cafe the moment they were gone. The waitress eyed me curiously as I scanned the table. There it was, an abandoned copy of the document. I grabbed it, tucking it into my shawl before hurrying out. Under the dim streetlight, I unfolded the paper. My chest tightened. It was a prepared affidavit. My son's signature was scrawled at the bottom. The statement accused me of financial negligence, of misusing my late husband's estate, of being unfit to manage it. I sank onto a bench, the paper trembling in my hands. He had signed against me. Back home, I locked myself in my room, staring at the affidavit. My tears blurred the words, but the betrayal burned clear. Still, a tiny voice inside me whispered, "Maybe he doesn't understand what he signed. Maybe he thinks it's just paperwork. Maybe there's still time to stop this." But another voice, colder and sharper, asked the question that twisted my stomach into knots. If he was willing to sign once, what else would he be willing to do against me? I couldn't sleep that night. The affidavit lay on the bedside table, its edges curling under the weight of my tears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's signature. His betrayal stared back at me in black ink. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I couldn't sit quietly and watch my brother-in-law twist him further. If my son was being pulled into a trap, I had to break it, before it swallowed both of us. The next morning, I went to see Kamal, the lawyer. My hands shook as I slid the affidavit across his desk. He read quickly, then leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "This changes everything. With this document, they're strengthening their petition. They'll argue that even your own son believes you mishandled the estate. Judges don't take that lightly." My chest tightened. "So what do we do?" Kamal tapped the paper. "We find their weak spot. Your brother-in-law is smart, but greedy men always leave trails. If he's been transferring money or influencing your son financially, we'll uncover it. But you have to be strong. The court battle will get ugly." Ugly, that word echoed in my mind as I walked home. Later that week, the first hearing was scheduled. I remember standing outside the courthouse, the sun blazing down on the stone steps, my palms damp with sweat. People rushed in and out, strangers carrying their own battles. But mine felt heavier than all of them combined. Inside the courtroom, I saw him. My brother-in-law, dressed in a crisp suit, smug confidence painted across his face. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His smirk was enough. And then my son entered. He avoided my eyes, sitting beside his uncle as if that seat had always belonged to him. The sight nearly broke me, but I stood tall, reminding myself, he's not the enemy. He's the victim. The judge began, formal words echoing in the room. Petitions were read aloud. When my name came up, I felt the weight of every gaze pressing on me. My brother-in-law's lawyer stood, painting a picture of me as reckless, manipulative, unfit to handle finances. He spoke of mismanaged funds and ignored wishes. Lies, all of them. And then he introduced my son's affidavit. The words cut me like a knife. Hearing them read aloud, accusations written in his hand, made the ground tilt beneath me. When it was my lawyer's turn, Kamal countered firmly, reminding the court that accusations weren't proof. That manipulation was a real danger in inheritance disputes. He requested time to gather evidence. The judge agreed. The next hearing would be in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prove I wasn't the villain they painted me to be. Back home, the silence was unbearable. My son walked past me like I was a stranger. That night, as he left his bag on the couch, something fell out. A folded receipt. I picked it up when he went upstairs. It was from an electronics store. A brand new phone paid in cash. The date matched the week my brother-in-law started meeting with him. My hands trembled. Was this part of the bribe? Was my son being bought piece by piece? The next day, I showed the receipt to Kamal. His eyes narrowed. This is something. If we can link the cash to your brother-in-law, it proves undue influence. Keep collecting. Every little piece matters. So I started watching closer. Not just my son, but the man pulling his strings. A week later, I followed my brother-in-law discreetly after court. He stopped at a bank, met a man inside, and left carrying a briefcase. My instincts screamed that it was important. I asked Farah for help. She had a cousin working at the bank, someone who might discreetly confirm details. It took days, but finally Farah returned with news. Her cousin couldn't give official records, but hinted that my brother-in-law had been withdrawing large sums of cash. Regularly. I felt a spark of hope. Greed always leaves fingerprints. Meanwhile, my son grew colder. At dinner one evening, I tried one last time. Why do you trust him more than me? I asked softly. He set down his fork. Because he listens. Because he says things that make sense. You just hide. I hide? My voice cracked. I've shielded you your whole life. From the truth, from pain, from greed. I hid things only to protect you. He shook his head. Uncle says that's exactly what a liar would say. His words shattered me. For the first time, I saw the possibility that I might lose him completely. As the second hearing approached, Kamal advised me to stay calm. We'll present what we have. The judge needs to see doubt in their story. But I wasn't calm. The night before court, I searched through old files, receipts, and letters, desperate for anything that could connect my late husband's intentions to reality. And then, I found it. Tucked between old documents was a sealed envelope addressed in my husband's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Not a legal document, but a personal note. He had written it shortly before his death. In it, he explained his fears. How his brother's greed worried him. How he wanted me to safeguard the estate, even if others doubted me. My eyes blurred with tears. This letter was never meant for court. It was meant for me. A lifeline in my darkest hour, but now it could change everything. The next morning, I showed it to Kamal. He read silently, then looked up. This isn't legally binding, he said carefully, but it shows intent. It humanizes you. It may sway the judge. I clutched the letter to my chest. Then we use it. At the courthouse, tension filled the air. My brother-in-law looked confident again, whispering to his lawyer. My son sat beside him, expression blank. When our turn came, Kamal presented the receipt, questioning why a teenager suddenly had expensive gifts without a clear income. He argued undue influence. Then he placed the letter before the judge. The courtroom fell silent as the words were read aloud. My husband's voice seemed to echo from beyond, his warnings, his love, his trust in me. For the first time, I saw my son's expression falter. His lips pressed tight, his eyes flickering with doubt. I held my breath, waiting. But just as hope flickered, my brother-in-law leaned close to him, whispering something sharp. My son stiffened, his doubt hardening back into stone. The judge adjourned the hearing, scheduling another session for 2 weeks later. As I gathered my papers, one thought pierced through the noise. If my husband's own words weren't enough to break my son free, what on earth would be? I left the courthouse clutching my husband's letter against my chest. It should have been enough. His words, his warnings. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in my son's eyes. But then, like a candle snuffed out, his uncle's whisper turned that doubt back into stone. I walked home with heavy steps, the letter burning in my hand. If even my husband's voice from the grave couldn't break through, then I had to do more. I had to gather proof so undeniable that neither my son nor the court could ignore it. But the question clawed at me, how? The next morning, Kamal called me into his office. His tone was serious. We're running out of time. The judge gave us 2 weeks. That means 2 weeks to expose your brother-in-law for what he truly is. I nodded, gripping the armrest of the chair. He's been withdrawing cash. He's been bribing my son. But we need more. Something concrete. Kamal leaned forward. Then we dig deeper. Banks, property records, anything. But remember, if we push too far without evidence, he'll claim harassment. We need to be careful. Careful. The word felt almost useless when my family was slipping through my fingers. Later that week, I decided to act on my own. I followed my brother-in-law again, careful not to be seen. My heart pounded every time he glanced over his shoulder, but he never noticed me. He drove into a part of town I rarely visited. Narrow streets, old shops, the kind of place where secrets hide easily. He parked outside a private office building. No signs, just a polished door. I waited, watching from across the street. After 20 minutes, he emerged carrying a slim folder. His expression was smug, almost victorious. My gut told me whatever was in that folder mattered. The next evening, I confided in Farah. Her face tightened as I spoke. "You're risking too much," she said. "If he catches you following him?" "I don't care," I cut her off. "I'd rather risk everything than let him steal my son and my husband's legacy." Farah hesitated, then sighed. "All right. But you can't do this alone. I'll help. We'll find out what he's hiding in that office." Her loyalty steadied me. Together, we started piecing together leads. Farah discovered that the building housed a financial consultancy, one known for managing off-the-books assets. My chest tightened. If my brother-in-law was moving estate funds into secret accounts, this could be the proof we needed. The next few days felt endless. I barely ate, barely slept. Every time I looked at my son, I wondered what lies were being fed into his ears. At dinner, he sat silently, scrolling through his new phone, barely acknowledging me. The distance between us felt wider than the table itself. By Thursday, Farah brought me news. I spoke to my cousin again, quietly. He checked some files. "Your brother-in-law opened a new account 3 months ago. Large deposits, all cash." My breath caught. "How large?" She lowered her voice. "Enough to raise questions. Hundreds of thousands." It was the trail Kamal had predicted. Greed leaves fingerprints. Now I had to make sure those prints were visible in court. But the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it felt. That weekend, I noticed a car idling near my street at odd hours. The same dark sedan parked 2 nights in a row, its windows tinted. When I stepped outside, it drove away. Paranoia whispered in my ear. Was he watching me now, the way I watched him? I decided not to tell Farah, not even Kamal. If my brother-in-law suspected I was onto him, he'd tighten his guard. I couldn't risk it. The following Monday, I returned to Kamal's office with everything I had. Farah's information, the bank hints, the receipt from my son's phone. Kamal spread the papers across his desk, rubbing his temples. "This is good. It's circumstantial, but together it builds a pattern. We need one more piece, something that directly ties the estate's funds to those accounts. If we get that, his whole case collapses." I swallowed hard. "And if we don't? Then the judge may believe him, and your son's testimony will tip the scales." His words felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. That night, unable to sleep, I went through my late husband's old files again. Bills, contracts, deeds, until something caught my eye. An old checkbook, nearly unused. Inside were stubs, payments made to his brother years ago. Large sums. No explanation. I stared at the faded ink. Had my husband known all along? Had he been covering debts, bribes, or worse? My chest tightened. This was bigger than I thought. If these checks connected to the cash my brother-in-law was now hiding, then maybe my husband's own trust had been betrayed long before his death. The thought crushed me, but it also lit a fire. I had one path left: trace every transaction, no matter how painful the truth. 2 nights later, Farah called me in a panic. "You need to be careful. My cousin said someone came asking about the files. Someone from your brother-in-law's side. They're on to us." My blood ran cold. It meant the walls were closing in. We had proof forming, but he knew. And if he knew, he'd do anything to bury it before the next hearing. I looked at the checkbook, the receipts, the letter from my husband, and whispered to myself, it's not just about inheritance anymore. It's about truth. About exposing the man who tore my family apart. But as I whispered those words, the doorbell rang. At that hour, so late, so sudden, my body froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and deep down I knew whoever stood behind that door wasn't there as a friend. The doorbell echoed through the house like a warning. I froze in the hallway, my hand hovering just above the doorknob. It was past midnight. Too late for neighbors. Too late for friends. Whoever stood outside wasn't here with kindness. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then slowly I opened the door. A man in a dark jacket stood on the porch. His face was half hidden beneath a cap, but his smile chilled me. "Mrs. Rahman?" he asked casually, though his voice carried an edge. "Yes," my voice trembled. He slipped his hands into his pockets. "You've been busy lately, digging into things that don't concern you? My boss thinks you should stop." The air seemed to thicken. I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" His smile widened. "Then accidents happen. Doors get broken. Records disappear. People disappear." He leaned closer. "Think about your son." The word struck me like a physical blow. I gripped the doorframe to keep from collapsing. My son, always my son. Before I could reply, he turned and walked down the path, disappearing into the night as silently as he'd come. I closed the door with shaking hands, bolting it quickly. My legs gave out beneath me and I sank to the floor. My breath came in short gasps. Fear clawed at my chest, but beneath it, anger sparked. He dared to threaten me, to use my son's safety as a weapon. If anything, that man had just given me more reason to fight. The next morning, I met Kamal at his office. He noticed the dark circles under my eyes. What happened? I told him everything. The late-night visitor. The threats. The warning about my son. Kamal clenched his jaw. "He's getting desperate." "That's good news. It means he knows you're close to something. But it also means we need to be careful." "Did he mention records?" I nodded. "Then that's where we strike. If he's worried about records disappearing, it means there are records worth finding." I leaned forward. "Then let's find them before he buries them forever." That afternoon, I called Farah and told her what happened. She gasped, covering her mouth. "You can't stay there alone. Come to my place for a few nights." But I shook my head. If I leave now, he wins. He'll think he scared me off. No, I'll stay. But I'll be ready. Still, her warning haunted me. That evening, I checked every lock twice. I kept the lights on in the living room, the letter from my husband close by, as if his words could shield me. But my son, he noticed my unease. At dinner, he finally spoke. "Why are you looking over your shoulder all the time?" His tone wasn't soft. It was accusatory. I stared at him. "Because the man you trust so blindly is dangerous. He sent someone here. They threatened you, not me. You." His fork clattered against the plate. "You're lying. Uncle would never what?" My voice cracked. "Pay for your silence? Buy your loyalty with gifts? Twist you against me?" He shoved back from the table. "At least he respects me. At least he doesn't treat me like a child." The words sliced deep. He stormed upstairs, leaving me trembling in my chair. I knew then. I wasn't just fighting for inheritance. I was fighting for my son's soul. 2 days later, Kamal called with a lead. We found a paper trail. Your brother-in-law funneled estate funds into a consultancy account. If we can get copies of those records, we'll have him cornered. How do we get them? I asked. He hesitated. It won't be easy. Officially, we'd need a court order. But by then, he'll have wiped them clean. Unofficially, I know someone who might help. But it's risky. Risky. The word had lost its meaning. My life had been nothing but risk since this war began. Do it, I said firmly. Later that week, Kamal arranged a quiet meeting. We sat in the corner of a dim cafe, away from prying eyes. A man slid into the booth beside us, carrying a slim briefcase. This is Tariq, Kamal whispered. He used to work in compliance. He can access the files discreetly. Tariq opened the case, pulling out photocopies. Your brother-in-law deposited over $500,000 in the last 3 months. All in cash, clearly estate funds, clearly illegal. My breath caught as I flipped through the pages. This was it. The proof. The nail in his coffin. But Tariq raised a finger. There's more. He's planning to transfer the money abroad. If he does, recovering it will be nearly impossible. You need to act fast. I looked at Kamal. His eyes hardened. We present this at the next hearing. The judge won't ignore it. Hope surged in my chest for the first time in weeks. But it was fragile, like glass in my hands. That night, I returned home with the copies tucked safely in my bag. I locked the door, checked the windows, and sat in the silence of my living room. My son came downstairs, his phone in hand. He eyed me suspiciously. Why do you look so smug? I forced a calm smile. Because sometimes the truth has a way of finding light. He frowned, clearly unsettled. For a moment, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. But then he muttered, Uncle says you'll twist anything to your advantage. He warned me about this. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to beg him to see. But instead I stayed quiet. Because soon, the evidence would speak louder than I ever could. A few nights later, the dark sedan returned. This time it didn't just idle. It pulled up directly in front of my house. My heart thudded as I peered through the curtains. 2 men sat inside. One of them lit a cigarette, the ember glowing like a signal in the dark. They didn't leave. They stayed for hours, watching, waiting. By dawn, they were gone. But the message was clear. They knew I had something. The following morning, Kamal phoned me urgently. His voice was sharp. We have a problem. Someone broke into Tariq's office last night. Files were stolen. He thinks they were after the originals. My stomach dropped. But we still have the copies, right? Yes, Kamal said. But if they realize you have them, they won't stop. Not until they silence you. I glanced at my son, still asleep upstairs. The image of the men outside burned in my mind. I had the evidence. I had the weapon to end this battle. But the real question now was, could I keep it safe long enough to use it? The morning light did little to ease the weight pressing on my chest. I hadn't slept. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside the window, it kept me on edge. I clutched the folder of copies like it was a shield, but deep down, I knew it was also a target. I couldn't ignore it anymore. They knew I had the evidence. They were circling closer. By breakfast, my son noticed my stiffness. He glanced at the bag sitting on the chair. What's in there? I pressed my lips together. Just documents. He narrowed his eyes. Uncle says you're hoarding lies to make him look guilty. I felt my throat tighten. And what do you believe? His silence cut deeper than words. He stood up, muttering something under his breath before slamming the door on his way out. Later that afternoon, I went to meet Kamal. He was waiting in his office, brows furrowed. The copies are valuable, but they won't hold forever. We need to bring them forward. File them officially with the court before your brother-in-law has time to twist things. My voice was sharp. Then let's do it. Today. He exhaled slowly. There's a problem. He's already maneuvering. He filed a motion accusing you of misusing estate funds. Claims you've been diverting money for personal use. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. What? Kamal slid a document across the desk. My name, my late husband's estate. Falsified entries showing transfers to my account. My stomach turned. This is fake. I know, Kamal said firmly. But the court doesn't. And if he pushes this hard enough, the judge will demand proof. Proof we have, but not yet secured. It hit me like a cruel trick. He was flipping the script, painting me as the thief before I could expose him. That evening, I attended a family gathering I had tried to avoid. But avoiding it would only feed his narrative. He was there, of course, standing tall, charming the room. My son stood beside him, beaming like a shadow of the man I used to know. When I entered, conversations hushed. Eyes turned toward me. My brother-in-law stepped forward, voice dripping with mock concern. Ah, there she is. The grieving widow who somehow manages to live above her means. Care to explain that? His words carried, calculated for the audience. Heat rushed to my cheeks. You're lying. And you know it. He smiled coldly. Funny. Banks don't lie. Numbers don't lie. But maybe mothers do. His gaze shifted deliberately to my son. The humiliation burned. Whispers rippled around the room. My son's face hardened, as if each accusation chipped away at whatever trust he had left in me. I forced myself to stand tall. If you think this is over, you're wrong. The truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, it won't be me drowning in it. His smirk faltered just for a moment, enough to tell me he knew the fight wasn't finished. The next morning, Kamal called. He's accelerating. Court date moved up. 3 days. 3 days. That was all the time I had left to protect my son, clear my name, and bring his corruption to light. I spent the next hours combing through the papers Tariq had given me, every receipt, every transaction. My eyes ached, my head pounded, but somewhere in those numbers was the crack that would break his facade. And then I found it. One transfer dated on a day my brother-in-law was abroad. The receipt carried his signature, but his passport showed he hadn't even been in the country. It was proof of forgery. Proof of intent. My hands shook as I called Kamal. I found it. He signed documents when he wasn't even here. This could be enough. Kamal's voice sharpened with urgency. Bring it to me, immediately. But when I went to retrieve the folder, it was gone. My bag sat open on the chair. Papers spilled across the floor, but the most crucial receipts were missing. Panic surged. I tore through drawers, cushions, shelves. Nothing. That's when my son walked in, holding the missing documents. His face was pale, conflicted. I didn't want to believe it, he whispered. But Uncle came by this morning. He told me to look in your things. He said if you were telling the truth, I'd find nothing. But I found this. I froze, heart hammering. And now you know. He shook his head, torn. I don't know what to believe. He says you forged these to frame him. He says you'd do anything to ruin him. I stepped forward, voice trembling. Do you really think I'd risk everything? Risk you it for a lie? He stared at me, eyes full of doubt and fear. And then he whispered, maybe I should just give these back to him. End this before it gets worse. My breath caught. If you hand him those papers, he wins. Not just against me, but against your father's memory. Everything your father built, everything he left for you will vanish. His grip tightened on the papers. Silence stretched between us. And then, he turned and walked upstairs, the documents still clutched in his hands. I stood frozen, every nerve screaming. Would my own son betray me? Or finally see the truth? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's face. Torn between me and his uncle, holding those papers like they were the scales of justice. I kept replaying his words. Maybe I should just give these back to him. By morning, the fear had hardened into resolve. I couldn't just wait for his decision. Too much was at stake. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, sitting silently with the documents spread before him. His eyes were red as though he'd been up all night, too. I tried to keep my voice steady. We don't have much time. Court is in 2 days. He didn't look up. Uncle says you'll twist anything to save yourself. He says you want me to hate him so you can control everything. The words pierced deeper than knives. Control? I've never wanted control. All I've ever wanted is to protect you. And your father's legacy. Finally, he looked at me. His hands trembled on the papers. If I go with you, and you're wrong, I lose him. But if I go with him, and you're right, I lose you. Either way, I lose someone. I reached across the table, desperate. You won't lose me if you stand for the truth. You'll only lose me if you turn away from it. He pulled his hands back, scooping up the documents, and walked upstairs without another word. Later that afternoon, Kamal came to the house. His face was grim. He's filed another motion. He's calling for an emergency hearing tomorrow instead of 2 days. He wants to strike before we're ready. My chest tightened. Tomorrow? Yes, we'll have to present what we have immediately. If we hesitate, the judge may lean toward his accusations. Kamal's eyes flicked toward the stairs where my son's door was closed. But the real question is, will your son testify? His choice may decide the case before the evidence does. The weight of it pressed down harder. My brother-in-law wasn't just attacking me, he was forcing my son to pick sides publicly. That night, I stood outside my son's door, my hand hovering over the knob. I wanted to go in, to plead, to beg him to see me clearly. But I stopped myself. If I pushed too hard, I might drive him further away. So I whispered through the door instead. Whatever you decide tomorrow, just remember who always stood by you, who stayed up when you were sick, who fought for your education, who never once turned her back. That's all I'll say. Silence. Then a faint sound, maybe him shifting on the bed. But no words. I went to my room with my heart in pieces. The next morning, the courtroom felt colder than any place I'd ever been. My brother-in-law stood tall in his tailored suit, confidence radiating from him like poison. His lawyer whispered in his ear, and he smirked at me as though he'd already won. Kamal leaned closer. Stay calm. We'll present what we have, but your son's stance could make or break it. The judge called the hearing to order. My brother-in-law's lawyer launched into accusations, painted me as a manipulative widow draining the estate for personal gain. He waved the falsified bank statements like a trophy, making sure the room saw every line. When it was our turn, Kamal stood. His voice was steady, firm. These statements are not just misleading, they are fraudulent. And we have receipts showing signatures signed while the alleged signer was out of the country. A murmur swept the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Do you have proof of that? Kamal nodded. We do. But the documents have been contested. The key lies with a witness who has seen both sides, and who holds the originals. All eyes turned to my son. My breath caught. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the documents clutched in his hands. The judge addressed him directly. Young man, are you prepared to submit those documents as evidence? The room was silent. My brother-in-law's eyes locked on him, a subtle shake of the head, a silent command. I whispered under my breath, too soft for anyone but myself to hear. Please choose truth. My son's hands trembled. He looked at me, just for a second, and then at his uncle. The tension was unbearable, every second dragging like a lifetime. And then he stood up. Papers pressed to his chest. His voice cracked. I don't know who to believe, but I know these papers don't belong in either of your hands until I understand them myself. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's brow furrowed. That's not an acceptable answer. You must either submit them or refuse to testify. Which is it? My son froze, torn between us. The judge's gavel tapped impatiently, and in that suspended moment, when his decision hung in the air, I realized everything would change depending on the next word out of his mouth. The judge's gavel struck again, sharp and impatient. Answer the question. Will you submit the documents or refuse to testify? The entire courtroom held its breath. My son stood trembling, the stack of papers clutched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked at his uncle, then at me, then back down at the papers. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. I'll submit them. The sound of my exhale was louder than I meant it to be. My knees almost buckled. He handed the papers to the clerk, his hands shaking the whole way. Kamal stepped forward, placing the submitted evidence on the judge's bench. Your Honor, these are the originals. You will see signatures forged, dates impossible, and bank transactions tied directly to the defendant, not my client. The judge scanned a few pages, his expression tightening. My brother-in-law shifted in his seat, his jaw clenching. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering harshly. The lawyer stood, trying to salvage what he could. Objection. These are incomplete. But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Enough. I see enough here to warrant a full review. The gavel struck again. Until further notice, all estate control remains with the widow. And this court will be investigating charges of fraud against the defendant. Gasps rippled through the room. My brother-in-law's face drained of color. His carefully built mask cracked, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He turned sharply to my son. You don't know what you've done. His voice was low, venomous. You'll regret this. But my son didn't cower. He didn't look away. He just stood straighter, his shoulders squaring. No, I think I finally did the right thing. When it was over, I walked out of that courtroom on legs that barely carried me. My son walked beside me, silent. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. Kamal held them off, his voice firm, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. Outside, the autumn wind bit at my face. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel suffocating. It felt sharp, cleansing, real. We drove home in silence. Only when we pulled into the driveway did my son finally speak. His voice cracked, softer than I'd heard in weeks. Mom, I'm sorry I doubted you. I turned to him, tears already spilling down my cheeks. You don't need to be sorry. You just needed to see the truth for yourself. That's all I ever wanted. He nodded, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the boy I used to know, the one who laughed freely, who trusted me without hesitation. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the house, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I stood on the porch with a cup of tea. The house keys dangled in my other hand, heavier now with meaning. This wasn't just a house. It was everything my husband had built, everything my brother-in-law had tried to steal, everything I had fought to protect. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt bittersweet. I thought of the nights I lay awake, terrified of losing my son, of the shame of being doubted, of the betrayal that came not from strangers but from family. Those wounds wouldn't vanish with a judge's ruling. They would scar, yet scars meant survival. They meant I had endured. Inside, I heard laughter, my son on the phone with a friend, his voice lighter, freer. The sound wrapped around me like a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, we could heal. The next week, Kamal came by with the final paperwork. It's settled, he said, handing me the official documents. Your late husband's estate is secure. And your brother-in-law, well, he'll be busy dealing with fraud charges for quite some time. I thanked him, though words felt too small. He smiled faintly, then left me to the quiet of my home. I walked through each room slowly. My husband's study still lined with his books, the kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals, the hallway where our son had taken his first steps. Every corner carried echoes of a life we had built together, a life almost stolen, but saved. I paused in the living room, tracing my hand along the old wooden frame of a family photo. My husband's face smiling back, my son small and bright-eyed between us. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was failing them. That night, as I lay in bed, I let myself finally breathe. The war wasn't without cost. My trust in family was shattered, my innocence gone, but in its place was something else, strength. The kind of strength that only comes from walking through fire and surviving. I whispered into the dark, half to my husband's memory, half to myself. We made it. We're still standing. A tear slid down my cheek, but this time it wasn't born of despair. It was release. And in that release, I found peace. Not perfect, not complete, but enough to carry me forward. This was my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.